Hi guys, it's Josh. I'm here with Brian Anderson, Field CTO, and today we're going to talk about Terraform. So we're going to introduce Terraform and show you how to do a basic AWS setup. So what do you have for us today, Brian?
Awesome. Yeah. So today we're going to talk about the life cycle of deployment management using a technology called Terraform. Terraform is a cloud agnostic cloud provisioning tool called infrastructure as code, where we can use different configuration files we're going to look at to deploy networks and configurations and functions and servers. And in this case, also Cato configurations like sites and rules and so forth. So today is just a very base level introduction to what is Terraform, how does it work, and we're going to be looking at how to create some basic resources in Terraform today. So the very
Awesome.
first step here would be to go to the HashiCorp website, and HashiCorp is the company that created the Terraform product. And here they have some installers for where to find how to install Terraform in your system, as this is one of the kind of requirements to be able to run that. In a terminal window, you should be able to run the command Terraform, and after you've done the installation properly, you'll come back with a screen that looks just like this,
So if you
right?
see that, you've got Terraform running and you're ready to go to the next step.
Exactly.
Sweet.
You've got Terraform up and running. The next step that I want to follow here is going to what's called the Terraform registry. And the registry essentially is like the Terraform marketplace for all things that I might want to find and use related to Terraform. If I were to do a search in here today, we're going to be looking at not at Cato, but something for like AWS, a very common cloud infrastructure that people deploy compute resources and different things. Many folks have used this before, but essentially, this is a resource that we're going to be using this provider today to deploy things into my personal AWS account that I have. So the first step would be to go down to the documentation. And in here, I can see that there's something related to authentication and configuration. Specific to AWS, they make you install or they rely on the CLI, the AWS CLI to be able to authenticate. And they have an installer here that you can click on that. I should be able to go to my terminal window if I properly installed this and run the AWS command. So when I have the AWS CLI installed, I might want to run AWS configure to set up my API key.
Yep.
And if you're looking at that install, they'll walk you through the IAM, which is the access management portion of AWS infrastructure. Create an API key. I enter my key here. And
So
then,
this is the AWS CLI, similar to like Azure CLI or Cloud Shell, is a prerequisite to running Terraform in your environment. You have to have that in order to be able to use Terraform, correct?
AWS for Terraform for AWS, yes, because
Okay.
the Terraform provider for AWS requires the CLI to be present for that's what they use for authentication.
Yep.
And Kato's works a little bit differently, and we'll talk about how each of the providers can initialize with different settings. But this is my local CLI configuration that I already have installed. So if you're able to run this AWS command and you configured your API credentials, you're up and running. And
Awesome.
so the next step here in relation to starting with the AWS Terraform provider, and we're starting with AWS because again, it's a very common.
Yeah, super well
Yeah,
known, right?
yeah.
Well documented for sure.
So let's take this example here that they have an example usage. And what I've done here is I've downloaded an IDE, an integrated development environment, just a text editor is all that
Yeah,
it is.
don't be scared by that. We
Yes,
talked
yeah,
about this before.
yeah.
It literally is just a text
Right.
editor.
Just a text editor, and
Yeah.
I'm going to pull up my Explorer here that shows I just have one file. The file is main.tf. I've created an empty file on my system, and I paste in the exact syntax that I got back from the AWS documentation. And this is some special keywords here in syntax is called HCL, HashiCorp config language. And this is kind of JSON looking, but what we do in here is we tell with this base snippets of code here what required providers I want to use. And I want to use the AWS provider. And so I want to make calls to AWS, and Terraform has an AWS provider that I can use to do that. The provider needs to initialize with a certain number of minimum required parameters. We've talked about how I'm using the CLI to authenticate and make calls, but they need to initialize with a minimum of one region to know which region I'm deploying in, right?
And then you could add multiple regions later, and you could add multiple, parameters here, right? This is just an example,
Right.
like, but you could do multiple things, right? This is just to get you going.
If I had more than one, for example, I could do US West, for example, West one, and I would have the alias that I would add to this and call it US West one or whatever, right? So I can
Got
have
it.
one
Yep.
provider, but in
Yep.
this case, the default one, if I want to leave it like this, I have one provider with one region, I'll keep it like that. And then we have down here below is a keyword called resource. Now, a resource all these things you see on the left here are resources that Amazon publishes. This
These are
is something
EC2 instances. These are DynamoDBs. These are obviously VPCs, right? All the AWS stuff that we all know and love.
correct.
Yeah.
This is something I want to create. I want to read, update, or delete.
Okay.
So it's a CRUD operation essentially that we're performing. And yeah, and the AWS resource here, it tells me what is the minimum required parameter that's optional. And in this case, the only thing that's required is my CIDR block. And
Yep.
so essentially, I'm just going to create the very bare minimum resource, and I've got my Amazon account here opened up to the same region where
Hmm.
I have no other VPCs aside from the default here. So I'm gonna now try to run this. So let's go back over to my terminal window. And again, I've created one text file. I've copied in my syntax from the documentation, and I want to run a command called Terraform init. And what the init command does is it looks at my local file. It says, what providers do you have defined? And then how are they initialized? And notice that there's a hidden folder that just was created after I ran init. And what happened here under the hood is it actually went and downloaded. It went and downloaded an executable for me that's built for my operating system. So if I'm on Mac, if I'm on Windows, if I'm on Ubuntu, I now have the Terraform provider version of that to be able to communicate with AWS. And
And
that's
we're
a
only
hidden.
showing that to you so you can see how Terraform works. It's not necessarily something that's
Yeah.
important for you to know long term. It's just more about, hey, this is awesome because it allows you to have a way to authenticate to AWS, Azure, GCP that's built in and purpose built for Terraform.
Mhm. So after you've initialized, the very next step is I want to run something called Terraform plan. What Terraform plan does is it's going to look at my configuration, and then it's going to tell me what it's going to do based on what it's done before. Notice that it created this Terraform TF state file. And I haven't, after I run plan, it's going to say, I'm going to add one resource. And the way that I run that resource is I run Terraform apply. Now, Terraform apply will actually go and apply my configuration, and it's going to confirm, yes, I want to confirm. And notice that it creates this Terraform state file. This is basically the brain of Terraform. And Terraform, the value proposition here is that it has a memory. It knows what it already did and knows what it's going to do compared to what it did before. This Terraform state file has all the things that are associated with my brand new VPC that I just created. So when I go in here and I hit refresh, I now see a new VPC that's been created, right? And it has, if I don't define all these other parameters, these are default values that will assign for me to those. So let's see what happens when I want to change my configuration now. And this being the age of AI and Copilot and such, let's use Copilot and say, add tags to this resource. And so this is going to know that it's Terraform because Copilot living in my IDE is super helpful to generate code for me. It says, hey, I'm going to add these tags here, and it's going to add a tag called name and environment. And if I go back to the documentation, I can add anything that I want to under tags, and it just pops up here under different resources that are available there inside of AWS. But now I'm going to run Terraform plan, if I could talk and type at the same time. So Terraform plan is going to compare my configuration to my state file, and it's going to say, I see a difference. And now it says, I'm going to add two tags to one resource because this is a difference that I see. And when I say Terraform apply, and I can say auto approve, so I don't need to confirm yes, I now apply this, and my resource has been created, and I can go back over to my window here, and I see that my tag has been applied, my
Yeah.
name is there, and now all these changes have been implemented. So what we've covered so far today is how to install Terraform and how to get the AWS provider up and running. And next we'll talk about Cato, but then what the state file is and how memory works, and so how I can manage the life cycle of my configurations in creating a single resource in Terraform.
Yeah, this has been really helpful. It's good stuff. Really, how I see this is like as you grow with these cloud providers in Cato, that state capability allows you not just to have a static conversation, it has the context of the conversation. And when you make those changes, it knows it's only applying that one thing. So that's really powerful. All right, Brad, thanks so much. Look forward to next videos.